So the weekly candle projection is something so simple. You only have to do it once a week. And from that point onwards, you're basically able to understand, are we potentially going to be moving to the upside, expanding, or are we potentially going to be reversing, let's just say as an example, to the downside. From that point onwards, day by day, we're basically going to be able to project where are we potentially moving, are we going to be hitting our points of interest that we've done on the weekly analysis, and then from that point onwards, basically get into some higher quality trades. So throughout this entire video, I'm going to be going through it in a lot of detail. Okay guys, so welcome back to another video. Again, as always, I'm going to keep it very nice and sweet and really get into the point straight away. So this time we're going to be talking about the weekly candle. Now, the only reason we even look at this, because you can understand, I trade on the intraday time frame, really executing on the 15-minute, doing an analysis on the 30-minute, and just understanding the daily time frame once a week on the weekly candle. Now, the reason we do that is because we can actually predict where the potential week is going to be moving ahead. Now, obviously, there's a few things that are incorporated into that. First of all, we're going to be talking about the weekly candle. Second of all, we're going to be talking about fundamental reports as well. Now, the first thing we want to talk about is this. Obviously, zooming out on the higher time frames with a weekly candle, there are times where, of course, we are within consolidation periods. There are times where we are within expansionary periods as well. This can be applied to pretty much any situation, but usually it's going to be in two scenarios. The first scenario that this information will apply is when we are expanding. And the second scenario that it will actually apply is when we are reversing. Now, the reason we can actually predict the market when these two things happen is because of the way, we even think about candlesticks. So really taking it back to basics, and we must understand this before getting into anything else. The weekly candle, what is it comprised of? Now, when you truly think about it, it is pretty much an open, a close, a low, and a high. And that is pretty much it. So let's just pretend, for example, we are in an uptrend for this scenario. What does this actually mean? If we open at this point over here, clearly we are starting at this price down here. Essentially, if we're saying that we're going to be moving upwards, it can be expected for price to eventually push downwards, at some point start to move all the way up to the high of the week, and then eventually for the rest of the week, it starts to close downwards. Of course, there's different variations of this. You might get, for example, the high of the week, then the low of the week, and then eventually it pushes up. There's a massive mixture, but in general, this is something that we can expect. Now, obviously, remember there are only 5 trading days in a week, so you can't expect the biggest amount of movement, all in just 1 week. Unless there's a crazy bit of news coming up and stuff like that, that's obviously an exception. So, in general, this is what you're going to get. The open of the week happens over here. The low eventually causes the wick to form over here. The wick at the top is caused because of the high of the week, and then eventually it closes at this point. So just based on that knowledge, what can we think about in terms of applying it to scenario 1? Now, when we are expanding in a certain direction, what do we usually expect? Well, of course, in a trending environment, you're going to be expecting up candle after up candle after up candle. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that each candle is going to be as aggressive as the last week, but all it's going to mean is that our next week is essentially going to engulf above the previous one. So, for example, if the wick closed over here, you can expect for the next week to do something like this, where once it opens, obviously that little gap in between is basically just the Sunday manipulation that happens, or the market open. We get the low of the week that happens at this point over here, and then eventually it continues upwards to the upside. Yes, there are weeks where we might get massive wicks, something like this, and there might even be weeks where barely any wick is shown. What's important to understand here is this. At some point throughout the next week, we are going to get a low. From that low, we can essentially expect price to expand upwards. Now, when we're looking at the lower time frames, what can we expect this to look like? Now, of course, if we have massive wicks in an uptrending environment, we are obviously going to be getting massive pullbacks. Now, I get a lot of questions sometimes saying, oh, a lot of my analysis is actually hit or miss, and some points of interest don't even get hit, and obviously I'm missing out on the trades. If we look at this is pretty much a 3-week consecutive time frame, and this is the weekly candle. So let's just make a note of that. This is the weekly. If we look at the 1-hour chart, what is that essentially going to look like? And just as a general sort of overview of everything like that, we are essentially going to have something like this. So let's just say as we're moving upwards, we have something like this. Okay, cool. And that is the end of the first week. Now, from the end of that first week, where do we have our points of interests? Okay, cool. So one point of interest might be over here. Another one might be down over here as well. A lot of people are going to be waiting for the extreme pullbacks for it to continue upwards. But what can we actually expect on the weekly time frame? It doesn't always give you that pullback, especially when you are moving very aggressively in a certain direction. So what can we actually expect? Instead, all we're going to get is a tiny pullback, something like this, and then essentially price pulls up to the upside. What happens at the end of the next week that's coming up? If we basically just put a close on that, this obviously represents what happened over here. And then the third week is what's coming up. As you can see, what actually happened is essentially price just gave a tiny pullback into no point of interest at all, into nothing at all, maybe just into a fair value gap or whatever, and then price just continued upwards. So when people do their analysis on the higher time frame and they mark out these 1 hour points of interest at extreme levels and they ask why does price not even, reverse and pull back to these areas, it's because of this. Because price is basically getting itself ready to expand very aggressively in a certain direction. So how can we link this to actually getting into trades? Obviously, we're still on about when we are expanding. So this is still part 1 of the video. Essentially, what we're going to be doing is this. As soon as the week opens, we can expect Monday price action to look something like this where it consolidates. At some point, we are going to get Tuesday and Wednesday, which gives us the low. And then essentially throughout the rest of the week, maybe Wednesday, Thursday, we get that expansion to the upside. So Monday and the start of the week is always going to be a bit of a slow day. Essentially, we're going to get the low of the week, hopefully by Tuesday, maybe even early Wednesday, and then price will continue to the upside. And of course, eventually we will get that pullback to wherever it closes. We can see this time and time again. Just looking at the past few weeks of price action over here, that's exactly what we can see. So just to finish it off, what are the requirements we actually look for when looking for expansions? All it is we, first of all, we are clearly in a trending environment. I'm just going to write environment. Then the second point is we are closing above previous weekly candles. As soon as we get to these two things in an expansionary period, essentially we can expect for price to continue to the upside. So even just looking at the previous week's price action, what did we actually get? Before that, we had an indecision candle. So at this point over here, I may potentially be looking at some certain sells. However, what price actually gave us was an expansion to the upside. In fact, we even closed above this area over here. So for me personally, I can clearly see some bullish momentum. At this point, all I'm going to be waiting for is Sunday to open. Eventually, Sunday will give us a low of the week and then continue to the upside as it's exactly done. Now, the only difference of this week is we didn't really get a massive bottom wick, which obviously isn't as usual, but when we are moving very aggressively, this does happen. As you can see in previous weeks, for example, at least we got a bit of a bottom wick over there. So every time we are expanding, we can expect a little retracement down and then continuation. However, the retracement down is not going to be a massive one. So bear that in mind when we are in expansionary periods. So just closing that up, we can clearly tell when we are expanding, these are the main things that we're going to be looking at. Now, let's look at the flip side when we're actually reversing in terms of price action. This one is also going to be, relatively simple, but you've got to put in a bit more factors, that we look at in terms of our technical analysis. Now, when we are reversing, just think about it. Whenever we are reversing, we're always doing something like this. We're going to be slowing down in price action and then obviously giving that little reversal. This, as many people know, is the market maker model for ICT and everything like that. So shout out to him with all that kind of knowledge and all that. But again, just knowing the knowledge is not enough. You have to be able to apply it. When it comes to this type of thing, when we are reversing, what can we expect? Very aggressive moves into this kind of area. But bear in mind, these are all, let's say, 1 hour candles. And then this blue sort of box is going to be the weekly candle. At this point, this is where we see price action start to slow down. We might actually see some indecision candles. So what do I mean by an indecision candle? It is simply where we get massive wicks to the upside or to the downside, and then basically the body is going to be quite small. That basically shows you that throughout that entire week, price moved up, then it moved down, then it came back to the middle where it really started. So it didn't really move somewhere significantly. All it did was basically just stay around the same type of spot. So what can we actually do in terms of reversals? As soon as we see on the weekly time frame these reversal candles at potential points of interest, that's when we might be looking for reversals. So just to briefly explain that over here. As you can see at this point over here, what have we actually got? Clearly we can see that we are in some sort of uptrend. So at this point over here, we are moving upwards, upwards, upwards. Okay, cool, nice. We have now pulled back down to this kind of point of interest over here. In general, what I would be looking at for buys would be this area. I would even potentially say that area, and then potentially this order block zone down here too. At this point, once we get to this kind of zone, I've got a very strong engulfing candle moving into it. I then have a indecision candle happening at this point. But even better than that, I can actually see, rather than an indecision candle, we got a rejection candle. Now, I'm going to do a video about this quite soon. It's going to be quite important to understand this, because once you understand what engulfing candles are, rejection candles, indecision candles, you're really going to understand how can we apply this and really put this into smart money concepts. Because for me, I think the sweet spot is when we combined SMC and ICT concepts with price action as well, along with fundamentals. So obviously, it's a massive picture that you're going to be looking at, but in general, you are going to be a lot more profitable with it and much higher win rate. At this point, we got a rejection candle. So price pushed downwards and then it started to close back where it was. What this shows to me is we have rejected of this kind of zone down here. The next week potentially might be a strong move upwards. So at this point, let's actually map this out completely. We've got a strong move down, and because we are moving downwards, let's actually put that a different color. So I hope this is all making sense. By the way, if you've got any questions, ask down below. If I've got time, honestly, I'll try my best to answer them. But yeah, as you can see, we moved into this point of interest over here. So let's just point that out, right, like that. Then at this point over here, clearly what we've got is a rejection to the downside. What price has done is it's moved all the way down and then come back close to where the entry was. So let's say something like this. At this point right here, I can expect for price to do something like this. Obviously, the closure is at this point. I can expect something like a tiny push downwards, but then eventually for price to push back upwards. And this is where we are going to see a very, very strong engulfing candle upwards. And as soon as we see that one, this is obviously going to be the first week. The second week potentially might even give us more of a engulfing candle to the upside. And that is how we spot, first of all, when we are expanding, continuations, and then also when we are reversing. It's all about how you look at the potential, how you look at price action at certain points of interest. We can relate the previous week, obviously, into the next week. And that is essentially why I even look at the weekly candle. But bear in mind, I only do this once. You know, once a week is substantial enough. You don't need to constantly look at it. You only need to basically have a frame of potentially where we might be moving for the week ahead. Once we have something like that, it's quite simple. We only look at the lower time frame. We look at our daily cycles, our intraday daily cycles, and then basically take it from there. So from that point onwards, that's where we can see a reversal. Again, a similar type of thing over here. As we're pushing upwards, we're getting potentially to this point of interest over here. As soon as we start slowing down, indecision candle, indecision, indecision. So we had a few weeks of consolidation. As soon as we had this candle pretty much give us that engulfing candle down, even though it didn't really close below it, it still showed us, you know, it really is starting to move down at least. What happened? We got a retracement upwards and then a continuation downwards. So always keep that in mind. Look at the weekly candle. You'll be able to look at your daily cycles after that, and then your intraday cycles very, very clearly. So that is the main 2 points that we're looking at. Again, guys, I do have for completely free the free PDF down below. And by the way, if anyone is interested, we are going to be closing up slots for our 3-week bootcamp very, very soon. And by the time this video comes out, potentially might actually be closed up. We are going to be doing this for about 3 weeks. Week 1 is all about the education. Week 2 will be basically back testing together as a team and getting you to that point where you can actually reach that 81% win rate that we've been able to do in all of our testing and even the live results as well. And then the 3rd week is live trading with the team. So this is something we're going to be doing very, very in depth. But yeah, guys, that's going to be it for this week. Please refer to the free PDF down below as well. There's a lot of information in that. And yeah, I'll catch you all in the next one. Take care.